selective. So I'm wanting to make this interactive. I know that we don't know each other super well, but I don't bite. I'm not mean. There are no bad answers to questions. So there'll be several times along the way where I'll invite you all to interact with me some. It makes it a little bit more interesting than just listening to one guy talk for 90 minutes straight. So I hope you guys can feel comfortable just responding to some questions. We're going to do some brainstorming together, thinking out loud. I want to recognize up front that we have a really diverse cultural mix here in this small room tonight, which is so beautiful and wonderful. At the same time, it raises challenges for a presenter like me, doesn't it? Because you all are coming out of a variety of different frameworks, cultural frameworks. When you think about parenting, when you think about marriage, when you think about discipline and childhood educating our children, we're operating sometimes on very different planets. So just to give you an idea where I'm coming from, I grew up I was just saying in the back, on a tiny island in the Caribbean called St. Croix. I lived there till I was 18 years old, at which point I left to go do my studies in the city of Chicago. That's where I did my undergrad, and I did one of my graduate degrees there, another graduate degree in Indiana, which is right next door. I met a beautiful French woman who I married, and decided to move to France with her and our three young children, 5, 3, and 0. My daughter Chloe was about 6 months old at that point. And we had several different projects at the time, but one of them was for me to be able to learn French and for our kids to start to get a good start. And as I was saying earlier, we got sort of stuck here. It's been 17 years. We've never left. And now, interestingly enough, my own vision of parenting is not just American on some levels, Caribbean on some levels. It's also very influenced by 17 years of life in France, where I spend most of my time in a French-speaking world. And a lot of interaction with French parents. So I want to recognize that there's going to be a little bit of cultural distance between what I'm bringing to the table tonight and what some of you are experiencing. Feel free to disagree with me. It's okay. There's no real clear science to any of this. I'm going to share with you what I think are some fairly universal parenting principles. The hope is that I get a maximum of, it's like that. But I know not everyone's going to always be with me, and that's okay. So my hope for you is that there's some certain things that you may hear me say and you're like, we don't do it that way, or I don't like that. That you'll be able to just sort of set that aside and keep moving with me, and hopefully there'll be a few things you can stick in your pocket and bring home for conversation, perhaps with your spouse. I don't know if some of you may not be here with your spouse, and that's okay. Some of you may be raising a child on your own, and here in France, actually, a lot of our households are like that. What we call in French, des familles monoparentales, single-parent homes. So I can also recognize that we don't just have cultural differences here, we also have a variety of different types of parenting situations. In some of my parenting conferences, I even have grandparents that show up that are raising their children. So I want to take into account that reality as well. We've got a lot of diversity. So I'm going to do my best trying to hit as many household situations as I possibly can, but not everything is going to hit home for you. I lost my presentation here, so we're going to try and get that back. For those of you that are a little bit tech savvy, I wanted to give you the possibility of scanning this QR code, which will give you access to the PowerPoint. All the big ideas that I'm bringing will be in the PowerPoint. There's also some suggested resources that'll be there, so you can take all that content home with you. It's also helpful if some of the words may end up being too small for you. I need reading glasses now as I get older. Some of you may be in the same boat as me. This way you can have it right on the screen in front of you. So go ahead and scan that. And as you do that, I'll tell you a little bit about my family. I'm going to show you a picture of them in just a second here. So when we first got to France, my oldest was 5 years old. She is now 22 and married. Oh my gosh. So I have a son-in-law named Josiah. And my other children have warned me, Dad, get ready. You could be a grandfather soon. I'm not ready for that yet. I'm way too young in my head to be a granddad. But we are very excited to be adding another member of the household, our son-in-law Josiah, who we love. After Christelle and Josiah, I have another son, Micah, who is 20, who is pursuing his university studies in South Carolina, alongside of his younger sister, Chloe, who is 18 and in her first year of university. So I have 3 of my children that have left me. which may be a little bit discouraging for you, because what went wrong with your parenting, Nick, that your children wanted to cross the Atlantic and live in America while you're over here in France? And we'll tell a little bit more of my story as I go. Actually, I like to start out by letting you know that one of the reasons why I dare to come and speak about this topic is because for my wife and I think that what we lived as a family, it's probably one of the greatest experiences that either of us have had in our life. The quality of the relationships that we have with our children, our adult children today, it's probably one of those things we would say we've been most successful at. And we're glad to be able to pass on a little bit of our experience. There's a ton of things we failed at. There's a ton of things we're no good at. Parenting was something that went really, really well for us. And although our kids are on the other side of the Atlantic, the relationships are very, very close and very, very tight. We're going to talk in just a few minutes about projecting out and imagining, what do I want my relationship with my children to look like when they're 22? Or when they're 30? Or when they're 45? Or maybe in some cases just when they're 10? Where do I want to be if today my child is only 6 and 4 years out? So we're going to start to project. And I want to just lay out before you right from the get-go the idea that I think family can be one of the most beautiful experiences of our lives, can be one of the most fulfilling experiences of our lives. Those relationships that we can have with our children can be some of the most valuable relationships that we have in our lives. But the opposite of all those statements is also true. Family can be one of the most painful things we experience in our lives, one of the most difficult things we do in our lives. And sometimes the relationships that we have in our children with our children can be among the most difficult relationships we have. So we are facing those two realities. This is not going to be a Disney World presentation. Parenting is super hard. And we make a ton of mistakes along the way. And even when there's a lot of things we get right, things can go really wrong, can't they? There's a lot of things that are out of our hands with these little kiddos. They can be wild beasts sometimes. They can be hard to tame. So with all that in mind, I'm going to go ahead and show you a little picture of my wild beasts. So my wife, Annie, over here on the left. This is our youngest, Wesley, who's 12, who's basically this year in what would be in 7th grade in the U.S. system. He's in 5e here in France. My daughter, Christelle, and her son, Josiah, and then my son, Micah, and daughter, Chloe. Does anyone recognize the chateau that's back behind us? C'est quel château? Ouais, voilà, je viens de découvrir pour la première fois. We just experienced this chateau a couple weeks ago over the Christmas holiday. It was breathtaking. All right, I want to go ahead and dive right in, guys, with a couple of key words. See, love, and grow. And the basic operating principle for tonight, or principles, are stated very simply. Parents who see well, love well. When parents love well, children grow well. Now, are there exceptions to that? Is that a hard set rule? Yes, there are exceptions. No, it's not a rule. Because as I said before, sometimes when we see well and love well, sometimes our kids don't grow well. There are things that are out of our control. So I'm going to present that more as a principle than a rule. In many, many cases, parents who see well love well. And when they love well, their children grow well. And I want to unpack those key words with the time that we have remaining. So let's press down into that a little bit, those ideas. Now, I want to begin by distinguishing between two types of parenting, although there's loads of parenting models out there. I want to kind of simplify things a little bit by talking about just two. The difference between what we might call intentional parenting and what we might call autopilot parenting. All right? Intentional parenting versus autopilot parenting. Real quickly, how am I doing speed-wise? Is everybody tracking with me okay? Too fast? That's okay. If you ever feel like I'm going too fast, guys, because I get excited. Slow down, man. All right, don't hesitate to do that. Intentional parenting versus autopilot parenting. What's the difference between these two? Let's start with autopilot parenting, which unfortunately I think characterizes a lot of us at different times. Autopilot parenting, you guys, is when we're not engaging our brains that much. We're reacting. We're surviving. I don't know how many of you are living in households where both mom and dad are working. Again, if you're in a single parent home, it's just you managing everything. In any case, as we know, life gets busy. It can be very full. And taking the time to actually stop and reflect and think through our decisions, taking time for healthy communication with our children, sometimes that time is just not there. We're just on the go. And so we're in this sort of reactionary mode that we'll call autopilot. It tends to be short-sighted, where I'm not operating on what we might call long-term goals. I'm not operating with any sort of a vision or project. I'm just sort of trying to get through the day. Maybe I'm just trying to get through the morning in some cases, because I've got so much that I'm juggling. So I'm only seeing what's right here in front of my nose. Rather than it being purposeful, it can be random. Sometimes maybe I'm telling my kid to go to the corner. Another time, maybe depending on the age, I'm taking their Nintendo Switch away. Again, depending on the age, maybe they get no telephone rights. Maybe sometimes I'm deciding to scream at them. Maybe sometimes I'm grounding them. So my discipline is going all over the place because it's not well thought through, and I'm in reaction mode. I'm trying to come up with something. And so whatever comes to my mind, that's what comes out of my mouth in autopilot parenting. It tends to be instinctive, rooted in my instincts. So what comes the most naturally to me? Now, some of us would say, well, that's a good thing. Go with your instincts. Aren't we supposed to do that? Go with what you feel. I don't know how that works for you guys, but my instincts often get me in trouble. Sometimes my own desires, sometimes my most natural reactions produce a bad result. Are you guys agreeing with me? So no matter how much I would love for my instincts to always orient me along the right path, sometimes they let me down. And so sometimes I have to revisit even my own instincts and say, okay, in this situation, you tend to react that way. That's what comes most naturally. Is that a good thing? Do you want to keep reacting that way? And if you keep reacting that way, what result will that give you in a year, in 3 years, in 10 years in your relationship with your child? And it tends to be, this type of parenting also tends to be impulsive. So again, linked to instincts, often based on feelings. It can be very emotional. So driven by the emotions that I'm feeling in the moment. And what do those emotions tend to be? Frustration, irritation, anger, and a ton of other things. Sometimes fear, sometimes stress, sometimes great joy. But emotion-driven parenting often will get us into trouble when it's impulsive. So fortunately, that's not the only kind of parenting that's out there, guys. We have an alternative. What I'm going to call intentional parenting. So intentional parenting, by contrast, sets targets or goals, objectives. And they're going to be objectives that are both short-term and long-term. So in just a little bit, we're going to think through the idea of a longer-term dream. What do I imagine my family looking like in 10 years? When my kids are adults, what do I dream about in my relationship with them? What do I want that to be like? And so imagining something like that helps to set me up for making better decisions today, right? So, but also short-term goals. So my son is 12 years old. He's facing certain very specific challenges and opportunities. There's certain arenas of growth that are appropriate to this stage of life that are very different from my 18-year-old son. Having certain types of conversations with my son who's in his third year of college, and others with my son who's in his second year of junior high. And I can't treat them the same way, though sometimes when I'm in automatic pilots, I'm tempted to. I'm just not thinking it through, right? So here, intentional parenting, I'm taking into account who my child is, where he is or her is at life right now, and what are some appropriate goals for him or her that'll help him to advance, her to advance, or some appropriate goals for our relationship at this season of life. The idea of having a strategy means that I'm actually thinking through, why am I doing the things that I'm doing? I mean, many of you guys are working in environments where I'm sure you're talking about strategy a lot. You're operating with vision and goals and objectives and strategy. You're not just randomly launching into projects and seeing how it goes, right? There is strategy, there's protocol that's orienting you and helping you to know how do you respond to the different challenges, crises, opportunities that emerge. Well, we as parents want to be able to function that way as well. We want to be able to set in place routines. So developing healthy habits that are oriented in specific goals that we have set. Now, we all have habits, don't we? All of us as parents have habits. The question is, are they good habits or are they bad habits? And as we take a look at what are some of the things that happen day after day, sometimes there's the same kind of conflicts that happen day after day. Sometimes at the same moments. There's certain key moments in the day, like, for example, mealtime, depending on the age of your child. Someone out there just told me they have a 3-year-old, even 4-year-olds. I don't know how that's going. You have 2 4.5-year-olds, is that right, twins? At this point, depending on your parenting, this could be going better, but can also be very challenging. So from like 18 months, for example, to the 3-year mark, mealtime, we can have some of the same battles that come back again and again and again. That when it's time to go to bed, we can face some of the same challenges again and again. In the morning when it's time to head off to school, we face some of the same challenges. We hear some of the same things coming out of our mouth that we said yesterday and the day before yesterday, and the same things coming out of the mouth of our child that they said yesterday and the day before. And when we take a look at that, we're like, I just don't like how this is going. I don't like this habit. I want to establish a new kind of routine that's rooted in purpose and intention, and that's going to bear good fruit. It's going to bring a good result. All right, so you guys, I think, got the idea of these two different types of parenting. And with that in mind, what our goal obviously is this one. We want to try to reduce the amount of parenting that's happening on the automatic pilot side, which is really my prefrontal cortex is being turned off and I'm operating on instinct. And over here, we want to be thinking it through and knowing why we're doing the things that we're doing. Now, I want to put a little caveat into that, because some of you are probably saying, wait a minute, Nick. Sometimes instincts are really important. Like, for example, when my child is getting ready to run out into the street, and without even thinking, I reach out and grab him by the hands. Thank God for the amygdala, right? I mean, do you guys know what I'm talking about? That little part of your brain. Sometimes we talk about the reptilian brain that is rooted in your senses and your emotions and helps you react quickly, especially in dangerous situations. Well, I'm happy that's there. But all too often, we treat situations that aren't at all dangerous as if they are. Situations that don't need an immediate reaction as if they did. And the vast majority of our parenting situations are the moments that we spend with our children, we do have the time to think things through. We don't have to react right away. And so it's nice to realize that that's the case. So here's the kind of our journey for tonight. We're going to take 3 big steps as we spend the next hour together. The first, and I just used a couple images to help us picture these things. The first is the image of a spyglass. So we're going to talk about the parenting spyglass, which is really about seeing into the future, right? And cultivating a vision. That's going to be a basis for our strategy. 2 kind of key words is the idea of imagining, using my imagination to picture what I hope to be. And the idea of anticipating, that rather than being in a reactionary place where I'm living just with what's in front of my nose, I'm thinking ahead and I'm taking steps to prepare. The second image is the image of the rearview mirror, right? I don't want to be constantly staring at my rearview mirror because I'm going to crash if I do that. But every once in a while, it's helpful to take a little peek into the rearview mirror and have an eye on what's back there behind me. And here, 2 key words is the idea of recognizing and sorting. And what we're going to talk about with the rearview mirror is the influence of our past as parents on how we parent in the present. Whether I like it or not, there are things from my past. There are people from my past. There are experiences from my past. There are genes that have been passed on to me from my parents that are influencing the way I respond to and care for my children. Some of those are wonderful. Others are not. And so I first want to have eyes to recognize, all right, what's back there that's affecting my parenting? And then I want to be able to sort it out. What do I want to keep? And what do I need to get rid of if I want to achieve my long-term goals? The last image that we're going to talk about is kind of an image of spectacles. This is really kind of a sad one for me because I'm at a stage in life where I need reading glasses now to read. I have hair spread all around the house because I lose my reading glasses. So it's yet another thing that makes me feel old, but I'm really thankful for these reading glasses because they help me to see things the way that they really are, that tend to get a little blurry for me now. And we're going to talk about 2 key words with that. The idea of discerning. And here, one of the key points is being able to see my child and discern where they're at, who they are, what they need. And also, we're going to talk some about validating. That as I see things where I recognize value in my child, I'm going to be able to put words to that and speak it out to encourage them and build them up. Okay, so that's our journey for tonight. And we are going to start with the first category, which is the category of the parental spyglass, seeing into the future. And I want to introduce 3 questions with this idea. Where are we heading now? Where do we want to go? And how do we change course if we need to? All right? Where are we heading now? Where do we want to go? And how do we change course? So what do I mean by that? So if I take a look at my family situation right now, it makes me think of, I don't know if you guys ever watch. Do you know who the super nanny is? Have you ever heard that term? Super nanny? Nobody knows that. Okay, so there's this British woman. Oh, she's the lady that goes in. Jo Frost. That's right. So there's a woman who, do you guys know what a nanny is? Does everyone know that name? Okay, that word? So for those that don't know that term, or in French we use the term nounou. So it's basically it's a woman, usually a woman, that we're going to hire to come and take care of the children in the home. Well, the super nanny is a woman who has a TV program, at least she did, and families would hire her to come in, basically families that were in crisis would hire her to come into their home, and there would be television cameras and everything, and they would do a whole episode of the super nanny saving this family that was in crisis. What's so interesting in episode after episode, now these are all available on YouTube. Quite frankly, they're fascinating to watch because they hit all the different age levels. You see tons of different types of family structures. At one point, there are teenage children that call the super nanny to ask her to come save their family. Anyway, they're great episodes. But what you realize, and you sometimes hear from the parents, they are so exhausted, so frustrated, the level of tension is so high, they can sense if things don't change radically, we are heading for the wall. Like, there's going to be disaster ahead for our family. They can feel it. And it's true that often you see these little clips of family life, and you're like, oh my goodness. And then you're like, oh, that looks like my family, actually. So the idea is to be honest. Take an honest look. We all in our brains, we like to imagine that our family is perfect. It's just right. It's how it should be. I'm doing a great job. But the reality is, not that much. We got a lot of work to do, don't we? We still have a lot to learn. And so we need to take an honest look at our situation and say, all right, if things stay the way they are, if dad keeps operating the way he operates, mom keeps operating the way she operates, if the kids keep doing what they do, where will we be in 3 years, 5, 10? Let's be honest. Let's project out. Because I think the other thing that we can sometimes do is what we sometimes call in English a lot of wishful thinking. Wishful thinking is that, man, I hope this gets better someday. And I don't know if you guys have ever heard this definition of insanity, but they say one definition of insanity is thinking that I can keep on doing the same things that I've always done, but get a different result. Right? It's crazy to think that. If I keep on doing the same things I've always done, I'm going to keep on getting the same result I've always gotten. Don't we agree with that? So if I want a different outcome, that means I'm going to have to change some things. And change, as we have to admit, is hard. And actually, change takes time, doesn't it? You guys are going to come out of this event tonight with some good ideas in your heads. By the time you get up tomorrow morning, you will have forgotten most of what I have said. That's pretty depressing for me, because I worked a lot of hours to get ready for this. Really, I drove like 3 hours to get down here. And I'm not imagining that you're going to remember much of what I said. Now, there's a very few number of you that are actually taking notes. There's a slightly better chance you do something with those. I saw many of you scan the PowerPoint, so at least you can go back and take another look. But I know how your lives are. You're busy, and we're naturally going to go back into the same things we always do, don't we? Unless we find a motivation. So what's going to motivate me to go back and open up Nick's PowerPoint again and relook at the notes? What's going to motivate me to sit down with my husband, or sit down with my wife, or perhaps if I'm a single parent, sit down with my children, or maybe with my sister, or my brother, or someone that I can talk this through with and say, look, here's where we are today. I don't like it. I want to be here in a year. I want to be here in 3. I want to be here in 5. Can you help me think through some of the changes? So the powerful motivation, guys, is what we can imagine about where we want to go. This is where dreaming comes in. And I think it's a good thing as a parent to dream a little bit. So this is where I want to just give you guys a chance to dream with me. Just take a second. As you think about your child, maybe you only have one, your children if you have several, think about where your family's at today. Try to project yourself out into a future of your choosing, 5 years out, 10, 25, as you wish. What are some of the characteristics that come to mind as you think, man, this is where I'd love to be? with my child? This is what kind of relationship I would love to have with them. So take just a second to think about that, and then we're going to kind of map some of that up here on the screen. Just a moment to dream a little bit. Let's see if I can get this to work. Oh yeah, yes. That was a short dream, I realized, but we don't have much time. So, guys, don't be afraid of me. I'm really, really kind and gentle most of the time. Just start throwing a few words out. What are some ideas? It could be a phrase that comes to your mind when you dream a little bit about where you'd like to see your family in a certain number of years. What are some key ideas that come to you? Happy. Okay. Successful. All right. And what's interesting with a word like that, in fact, with both of these words, is defining. When I think of happiness, what does that mean exactly? And when I think of success, what does that mean? And it's going to, different families will have different answers to that question.
And encouragement to take his own decisions.
Okay, so maybe I could say a certain degree of autonomy. Does that work? That word?
Yeah.
So, yeah, able to make his own decisions. Peaceful. Peaceful. Someday, man. Actually, be careful because at some point it gets too peaceful. Everybody's gone, and you're like, oh man, where'd everybody go? So peaceful. Okay, peaceful, yeah.
Helpful to one another, which is a team.
Yes. You know what? I might even use the idea of interdependence. You know, we're relying on one another. We're helpful to each other. Excellent.
Close relationship.
That's it. Maybe we can talk about intimacy. Yeah, intimate relationships. Yeah. And we could even, I mean, my wife and I use this language all the time. One of our goals from the time our kids were little is we want our kids to be our friends. We wanted them to want to be with us. Friendship, you know? We want to be friends. It's EI, isn't it? Did I misspell that? Yeah. Yeah, I've been friends too long. Oh, it is IE? Oh, I got it right the first time? Oh, okay, thank you.
After learning French, this confusion.
Exactly, it all gets mixed up in your brain. I like to blame it on that anyway. Any other key words? These are some great ones. Trust, that's an excellent word. Yes. Trusting relationships. That's right, when we can trust each other's word. I'm not worried that you're lying to me or you're hiding something from me. I can trust you. I know that you're reliable. It's a great one. Yes. Oh, I'll come right back. Forgiveness. Wow. That is excellent and not easy. It's a very powerful word. Trust is as well. All these are. Yes.
Comfortness, that they can reach out to us anytime. So
Yeah.
maybe it can cover in trust.
Trust, okay, yeah. This idea that they're comfortable to come and speak with us. You know, I think linked to this is sort of the notion of like availability, that we as parents are available to them. They know they can come to us and speak to us. We'll be there for them. Yeah, great.
Understanding and respecting the decision.
Okay, so there's a degree of understanding and respect that comes back to even autonomy, respecting their decision making. Yeah, exactly. So even respect with regards to this one up here, I think. Okay, very good, yes?
Independent.
Ooh, yeah. Oh, so interestingly, we had interdependence, but we also, and I think we could probably put that up there next to autonomy. It's very similar, isn't it? Independence. Okay, guys, help me out. Because in French it's different than English. Is it Independent. That's English? But en français c'est ah. Ouais, exact. Oh là là. Okay. Great. Yes.
Unconditional love.
Ooh. Oh my goodness. That's a tall order, isn't it? That's a big one. Unconditional love. I'm going to love you no matter what you do. And I'm hoping you'll love me no matter what I do. Hoping it goes both ways, exactly. Unconditional love.
Maybe
Yeah.
kindness.
And
kindness.
kindness. Okay, yeah. See, oh my gosh, we could spend the whole night just defining all of these words. What do you mean by that? Believe it or not, we're coming back to your word, actually. A lot of these words we're going to see as we advance. But wow, guys, what a great list we've got here. I'm just going to shrink that down so we can kind of see what we've done. I love that. And these are the kinds of things that we want to just lay out there before us and say, all right, where am I at today? Maybe I can't trust my 12-year-old son. Because I realize he's been spending time on YouTube watching videos he's not telling us about. Because his idiot school gave him a tablet. What are you guys thinking? I'm happy for that. But there's frustrations that come along with managing technology, and we're not always sure we can trust. How do we build that? The idea of unconditional love, it's all too easy to be kind and affectionate and loving when everything's going well. And when he's not or she's not making decisions that I like, man, it's a lot more challenging, isn't it? And vice versa. So it's interesting to lay these goals and objectives out, to talk about them together and decide, all right, how are we going to work towards these things? What needs to change so that we can get there? All right, guys, great. Man, I'm so happy. Y'all did great work on that. Who was it? Who I was talking to? Brad. He's like, I'm not sure how much interaction you're going to get tonight. I was like, no, I'm hopeful. I think we're going to be able to pull this off. So, all right, let's keep going here. So, where are we heading now? Where do we want to go? And how do we change? And the how do we change point is not easy, is it? Because it does force us to take an honest look at who we are and what we're doing and maybe some things that we're doing not so well. Maybe mistakes that we're making. And change takes time, and it takes perseverance, and honestly, it takes hard work. And it helps when it's something that we can work on together. I want to just suggest a couple of categories here that can be helpful as we think. We had a bunch of great words there. I want to hone it in a little bit and suggest possibly 3 arenas of goal setting that we could consider. Thinking about our communication. How do we interact with one another? I'm not going to have time to tell you guys much of my story tonight, but when I do this conference, I have 4 hours. And I tell a lot more of my personal story with my wife. But there was a period of time where I really had a hard time managing my anger. I could be an angry husband. I could be an angry dad. And sometimes my emotions just would overpower me in situations of frustration and irritation. And my wife and I in 2018 came to a point where we both realized this has got to change. Both for the sake of our marriage, but also for the sake of my relationship with my children. And I needed a radical change. And it was at that point, really, whereas for a long time, it was something that I kind of lived with. I knew how to ask for forgiveness. And so, man, I'm really sorry I talked to you that way. And so I could kind of keep pushing it down the road. But there came a point where we realized, you cannot act like this anymore. We need to do what's necessary to bring about some radical change so that we just don't communicate with angry and hurtful words to one another. We started using language of something we're going to see later on, the language of gentleness, for example. That became a major goal for me personally, to move from being angry in my communication sometimes to being able to communicate at all times with gentleness with my wife and my children. So you guys have your own battles, but this is an interesting thing. What's happening in our communication today that we just don't like? And we don't want that to continue. In 5 or 10 years, we want to have a different type of communication. What is that? And then that sets us up for figuring out, all right, what are some of the changes we need to put in place? So how do we handle hardship? How do we handle conflicts? Let's take an honest look at how it is today and how do we want it to be tomorrow. Another one is our memories, and it's an interesting thing. What will we remember doing together? My wife is really big into making memories, and I could spend all evening telling you the different strategies and things she puts in place so that we can do things that are going to be memorable as a family. But it's an interesting thing to think about today. What will our kids most remember when they think back on their childhood? What's going to stand out? When they're at college or wherever they end up, in their first years as adults, and they start to talk about their family experience, what will they talk about? What stories will they tell? My kids, for example, one of the stories that they always tell is what we do on Christmas Eve. So we have a tradition. Every Christmas Eve, we give something called intangible gifts, which are gifts you cannot purchase with money. You can't touch them with your hands. So every member of the family prepares something like a poem or a work of art or a little song or a story that they might write, or maybe a story they might want to read, or a joke, or a magic trick, or a dance. There's tons of different, or a puppet show. And we do those on Christmas Eve. We give those intangible gifts to one another. Well, my kids can remember every intangible gift that they have ever given. And most of the ones that the other members of the family have done. And this Christmas, when everyone was home, my wife had put together this video collage of all the intangible gifts that we had on video. And we just had an amazing time going back and laughing hysterically, and sometimes weeping even, over the different memories we had around this key moment. Well, that takes work to put something like that in place. But it's something my kids remember, they talk to their friends about, and they've decided we want our kids to live with that. What will you put in place that's maybe not there right now? What will we remember? What will the vacations look like? What kinds of experiences will we have that will stand out for them? What kinds of things will happen in the evening sometimes for us? What surprises will we live? That the kids are going to remember being kidnapped one night out of their beds and blindfolded and taken to McDonald's for ice cream. They'll never forget that event. You know what I mean? And so these are things we think about and anticipate and prepare the ground for. So what memories, and then also what values, what matters most to us as a family. In my way of living as a dad, what values am I communicating to my children? Well, I'm going to give you a little insight into my anger. What could make me angry sometimes as a dad? Well, sometimes if my kids were doing things in public that was embarrassing to me or made us look bad, that would make me angry. And I'd let my kids know. It wasn't very loving or kind. And I'll tell you what message was I sending to my children? What's important to Daddy? What all these people here think about me as my value. And it turned out, as I took a hard look at myself, I realized that really is very important to me. I had to ask the question, do I want that to be that important to me? Do I want what a bunch of strangers think of me to be more important to me than what my 5-year-old daughter thinks? And is what we call le regard in French, this look from outsiders. Is that what I want to be most influencing my decision-making and my emotional reactions? And if not, what needs to change in my value system? That's just one among many. But what matters most, and sometimes the things that matter most to me right now, or matter most to mommy right now, are things that are going to bear bad fruit. We have to take a look and say, should this matter that much? And if not, what needs to change, right? So these are just some categories. Again, we could spend the rest of the night on this. I'm going to move on to our next section, which is the parental rear view mirror. How's everybody doing? It's a lot of content. Are you guys doing okay? It's late. It's dinner starting to kick in. Maybe you're starting to get a little sleepy. Don't worry. If you start to nod out, I'll call you out by name. Unfortunately, I don't know any of your names. Parental rearview mirror, 2 goals, recognize and sort, 3 influences. There's tons of influences. I had to go simple, but I want to talk about 3 tonight. My family legacy, my life experiences, and these voices I hear in my head. And I'm not the only one, and I'm not crazy, guys, but I do hear voices in my head. And I'm sure you do too, whether you know it or not. There are people speaking to you and telling you things. Some of those voices are wise, and you want to listen to them. Others are not. The question is, how aware are you of the influence of those voices in your head? So let's take a quick dive into those, guys. First, my family legacy. And again, we could spend a lot of time on this, but what are some of the things that are influencing me in my parenting that I've, to some extent, inherited, right? So, certain things on a genetic level. Some things are just wired into my body and wired into my brain. I have no control over. They're just passed down through the family line. Well, I want to be aware of some of those things. And where does that become particularly important? Well, it can become particularly important in a number of different reasons, but in particular, maybe certain arenas regarding health, physical health, where it can be helpful, for example, for a daughter to be aware if there's a trend of breast cancer down through the line. My wife is dealing with that right now. Where actually all of the sisters thought that we had a certain genetic tendency within the family through her mom, and her mom just got new DNA testing that showed that actually she does not have this particular genetic tendency. It was a big relief to everyone. Doesn't mean we're completely safe, but that was good to know. Sometimes there can be pathological tendencies that get repeated within a family, forms of mental illness, for example. And it can be helpful to be aware of the fact that, man, this is something that runs in the family line. And I like to know about it, even though it's hard to take a look at it. And it could affect my parenting. How do we get ready for that? How do we take that seriously? How do we talk about it as a family? So genetics, an intellectual legacy. So every family is going to have a certain degree of intellectual engagement. I can imagine in this room we've got folks leaning probably a little bit more heavily into the maths and sciences. I'm not sure about that. My family leans a little bit more into the humanities, history, literature. I got a few that are with me here. I'm not alone. I'm glad to see that. My poor children were handicapped mathematically. I'm exaggerating slightly, but I did not like math, and I wasn't a big fan of science. And so in certain homes where parents, it was a huge intellectual value to make sure their kids were doing that and getting very, very strong because they wanted their kids in engineering, they wanted them in the sciences, they wanted them in research. They're pounding on those things, and those kids benefited on some level. Well, yeah, sometimes it can be too much, but there can be a real benefit to that as they came out with some of the same intellectual strengths that their parents had. And then maybe some of the same intellectual weaknesses too, right? And it's the same with my children. My children were very, very strong in the humanities. They love history. They love literature. We're a Christian family, and they're very dedicated to their faith. We spend a lot of time talking about those things. That got passed on to them. Math was a real pain for them. And now, interestingly enough, my oldest daughter shocked all of our socks off because she changed majors midway through her college career from political science to what? Pre-med. And she had to start taking biology, physics, and now she's on her way into physical therapy school to get her doctorate. So we would have never imagined that. And there, she took a look at her family heritage and she said, thanks, Mom and Dad, for the humanities, but the sciences are kind of interesting to me. I think I'm going to check those out, right? So we've got an intellectual legacy. There's a cultural legacy as well. For many of us, our cultural legacy is fairly complicated. Because maybe we were born in one place, we did our early childhood in another, maybe we did our studies then again in another, and now that we're adults, we're in another, and etc. And so there can be a whole mix of things, but how aware are we of the various cultural influences that we're passing on to our children? Again, some of those are wonderful. Some of those we might be like, you know what, I'm not so much of a fan of that aspect of my culture. Maybe that's something we want to change, right? Relational legacies, how we manage relationships. Again, this comes back to communication styles. Very oftentimes, it's so crazy, we hear this again and again, but children who grow up saying, I'm never going to talk to my children that way. What do they end up doing? When they become parents, they hear their dad, they hear their mom speaking from their mouth. How did you get in there? Oh my gosh, how did that happen? You know? So, and again, it's not all bad. We can have very positive relational legacy as well. In my family, we placed a huge emphasis on what we call emotional intelligence. We put a lot of work into developing emotional intelligence with our children. That's a part of their legacy. They benefited from a house where we weren't afraid to talk about our emotions. We weren't afraid to delve into what's the desire behind that emotion. What are you feeling right now? What's going on deep down in there? Now they've got that vocabulary, and they're able to talk like that with their friends. And one day they'll hopefully do that with their children. Experiential legacy as well. My family grew up in the mountains. So we did a lot of skiing and a lot of trail running and a lot of hiking. When I was a kid, I grew up on the beach. A lot of things that I lived as a child, my kids just didn't get to live, right? And so there's certain types of experience as well that we're passing on. Again, there's a lot of times that's neutral, but sometimes there can also be a dark side to some of that, and I want to delve into that a little bit more. Some of my personal life experiences. And here, this is going to look really negative, but I'm going to put the emphasis on the negative side of this because so often negative life experiences that we've had can overflow into our parenting without us even knowing it. And sometimes I'm responding to my child about a fight that I'm still trying to work out with my dad from years ago, right? That's just an example. But experiences of disappointment and failure, experiences that involve guilt or shame, experiences of comparison and jealousy. Sometimes certain family dynamics that I lived with my own siblings, and that I see those same things happening with my children, and I start taking sides. You know, you guys know what I mean? Like, if I was the younger brother who got picked on by the older man, I'm all in for the younger sibling. If I was the older brother, you know, who picked on the younger one, I'm like, go for it, man. You got this, you know. So all this is affecting the way that I react. Experience of sadness, grief, and shock. Things that have marked us deep down and maybe that we have not processed well, but that are still playing themselves out in ways that we're not even aware of in our relationship with our children. Betrayal, rejection, and abandonment. Fear, anxiety, stress. Again, embarrassment, humiliation, shame. I pulled that back down again from up there with the guilt, loneliness, solitude, exclusion. And then again, there can be positive ones. Experience of success, experience of popularity, experiences of achievement. It's so interesting. In America, we've got a massive sports culture over there. And it is just crazy how insane the dads get at sporting events with like 5-year-old children. And they're living some of this stuff out on both ends. Some dads that just never accomplished their sporting dream. And now they're just hoping that little Jimmy is going to get there, you know? He's going to make it. And so that stinking ref that just called a foul on my son, how dare he? And he becomes public enemy number one because of all this built up tension inside that I've never processed it as a dad. Sometimes dad went on into the big leagues. And now there's all this pressure on the kids because dad made it. And of course my son is going to be a great baseball player, just like his dad. You know? So it's not just negative things, but it's an interesting thing to consider. What are some of the particular life experiences from my past that, whether I know it or not, are influencing me? I'm just going to give you 2 quick stories that can help flesh this out that I find fascinating. They come from a book that I'm going to suggest later on by a guy named Daniel Siegel, who is a Siegel. You'll see his name later. He is a psychologist with an emphasis on children and family. And he tells a story in a book called Parenting from the Inside Out about when his firstborn son was less than 1 year old. And it was up to him at night to rock his child back to sleep. And his son would start screaming sometimes. And he would sometimes go into these panic attacks. And he just did not know why. His body would shut down in the face of his son's tears and cries. And it was super disturbing. He's like, I am a child psychologist. I should be an expert at this. But he could not control his body. He would go into a literal panic attack. And so he went and sought help. He went to get some assistance on that and started to delve down into where is that coming from? These bodily reactions, these deep, profound reactions to my son's crying. And it took him back to a year of residency when he was on this residency circuit getting a medical degree prior to becoming a psychologist. And he was on a pediatrics unit with little babies, and they were doing tests that involved needles and pricking these kids. And so he was around screaming babies all day for, I think it was a several month period, residency. And when you're in residency, for anyone who's been down that, I don't know how many doctors there are in our group here, but it's pretty crazy. It's nonstop. You're not getting much sleep. You just have to survive and get through it. You're not processing. You don't go see your therapist. You just don't have the time for that. And so he just had to grit it out, get through it, and then he gets done with that, and he's on to his next residency. And he never processed the trauma that he experienced dealing with these crying babies all day, every day, where he's the one that's making these babies cry. And so what he started to realize is he's holding his own crying child. His body, his psyche at some level is processing these really traumatic experiences that he had lived and just shutting down because he never worked his way through that stuff. That was a fascinating story for me. He was not at all conscious of the fact that that was there in his past, having that impact. A second one, actually, his co-author tells her own story. She's a early childhood specialist. And she talks about the misery of taking her children shoe shopping at the beginning of the school year. It was inevitably a horrible experience for her and the children. Everyone came home crying, frustrated. She was like, what's going on? Why is it so hard to go and buy shoes? And same thing. She did some work delving down into her story and went back and revisited some of her experiences, youngest of 7, not a very wealthy household, going to the shoe store at the beginning of the school year and realizing she's not coming home with any new shoes because she didn't get her sister's hand-me-downs. And all the frustration and tension and stress that came around that experience where she'd be begging and crying and she found shoes she liked and she couldn't. And all of this is from her early childhood. And it's coming out and it's affecting her reaction to her children in the shoe store. Who would imagine? But it's interesting to note that sometimes our emotional reactions give us insights into things that are still lurking back there and that are affecting how we respond. We're going to come back to that in just a second, but I want to mention something quickly about the voices that we're hearing in our heads. And the fact is that there are various people of influence in our lives, some that have influenced us positively, some that have influenced us negatively, but whose voices we're still hearing, right? Maybe not all the time, probably in certain situations, maybe certain times of year, those things come to mind. We talk often about the voice of our father, for example, my dad's voice, that I can hear talking to me and perhaps correcting me or telling me what expectations that he has, or depending on the dad, that what I did was not good enough. Or perhaps a dad that was really generous in his praise and his encouragement. It can be the same on the mom side, grandparents, uncles, aunts, members of an older brother that was super rigid with me, really hard on me, or an older sister. But sometimes these voices are influencing us. We can talk about, religious leaders, for those of us that have some sort of a religious background or religious connection. In my case, it might have been a pastor, for example, or a youth pastor. For some of you, it might have been a priest or an imam or some other type of religious leader that had an impact on your life and spoke things to you that are still affecting the way that maybe you see yourself, you see others, you see the world. We'd like to think that coming from a religious leader that what was said was true. Unfortunately, and I can say this as a pastor myself, it may not be. Religious leaders aren't perfect. They make mistakes too. And sometimes those words can be very impactful and they can be producing a negative result. Same with professors. We can talk about coaches and mentors and teachers and online influencers and maybe various hero figures for us. People that we're going to encounter in different forms of media and entertainment. It's interesting to consider, who are the voices that I'm hearing when I'm evaluating myself and I'm trying to decide if I did a good job or not? Who's telling me? Who's answering the question in my head for me? Who's setting the standard for me? Do you guys know what I'm saying? So it's very important for us to be aware, because oftentimes those voices that have been speaking in my head, they're going to come out of my mouth when I start talking to my children. And the question is, do I want my kids to have to listen to those same voices that I've been listening to? Right? And so this is where we're talking about recognizing and sorting. Part of this whole process is to be able to come into awareness of the fact that, wow, this really hard experience is still impacting me. This death in my family, or this loss, or this disappointment, or this failure, that's still having an effect on me. And I may need to process through that so that it doesn't come out in some way and have a negative impact on the way I interact with my children. And the same again with these voices that we may be hearing. So one little helpful insight that we can get, an indicator, is emotional reactions. It's interesting. One of the things that I had to learn to do is I started to delve into my anger as a dad and as a husband. And I got assistance with this. I actually went through a counseling course where I was trained to do this. We had to do this self-counseling project that was just fascinating. And it was a huge help for me. And actually, I came back to do the follow-up class to that just so that I could continue that project. One of the things it taught us to do is to take a look at our emotional reactions, in my case, perhaps irritation, frustration, anger, and start to work my way down from this, what we call bad fruit on the tree, what's actually visible, daddy's getting angry, and trace it down to the root. What's down here producing that bad fruit? What's the desire? What do you really want or don't want in this situation? What are you deeply believing? Like in that case, for example, I started to realize that, why am I so concerned about what the people around me think? Well, I have this deep belief that if they think I'm a good dad, then I am a good dad. If they respect me and see value in me, then I do have value. So I had a false belief in me that somehow my value is linked to your opinion of me. I had to learn to break that because it was bearing bad fruit in my life. Well, there's tons of things like that. And what's interesting is when a situation provokes some sort of emotional reaction in me, be it anger or be it sadness, some form of sadness, fear, disgust, or joy even, enthusiasm, we can ask the question, what's back there behind that? Where's that emotion coming from? And sometimes we can do that on our own. Sometimes, like me, I needed some help. I needed some guidance from some people who knew what they were doing to help me get down to some of those things that were at the root of this bad fruit that was coming out of me, right? So emotional reactions can be an indicator. Guys, before I go on to the last one, I've got about 25 minutes left. I'm going to stop there and just give us a chance to breathe, because, whoa, man, it's a lot, eh? And also, see, are there any questions or reactions, remarks to what we've covered so far? Sorry we're going so quick, but wow. There's quite a bit of content here. I want to just give us a little breathing room. Does anyone have a reaction, a response, or a question, maybe?
Response is, these things are quite profound, actually. Once who always focus for the better parenting. So definitely they are very useful.
Excellent. Thank you. So glad to hear that.
How to be a friend with our child? How to be a friend with our child?
How do we develop a friendship with our
Friendship,
child?
yeah, yeah.
That's a great question, and we're going to get into that actually in our the last step is the spectacle step. That's this is the climactic point. I see you, and so I'm going to come back to that. That's really one of the big questions. Yeah. Yes.
I feel that if I want to know my child and be in a good relationship with my child, I need to know myself and be in a good relationship with myself.
That's exactly right. Yeah. Yeah, and this is part of what I'm getting at here. Part of the process of knowing myself is having the courage to take a look at some of these things that are shaping who I am as a person and as a dad and husband, etc., or mom. So yeah, very well said. Yes.
And when you talk about the relationship with your family members, you said you are more concentrating on the emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
So can you just give us how you developed it and some of the...
Yeah, how do we do that? So yeah, I mean, again, we're going to get into that in just a second, but I would be happy to stop on that question for just a second, because one of the key factors in our parenting philosophy was distinguishing between behavior modification and character development. Does that make sense? So, on the one hand, there's a certain approach to parenting where I just try to get my kid to do what I want them to do. Just eat your peas, please. You know? Would you just please go to sleep? Mommy and I want to sit and watch our Netflix series. Leave us alone. So there's all kinds of strategies for behavior modification so I can get my kid to do what I want them to do, or not do what I don't want them to do. I get it. And I have to say, sometimes I in my parenting, I've crossed over into that. It's pretty selfish. That's self-centered parenting. It's about me. It's not about you. So another approach is that my actual strategy as a parent is focused on shaping the person that my child is becoming, character development. And so that's where, when my son has smacked his little sister, and she's screaming, if I'm in behavior modification, I just want to punish him so he's scared enough of me so that he won't smack his sister anymore. Or I want to make him feel really bad about it, you know, so he won't do it again. But the emotional intelligence and character development side says, man, let's take a look at what was going on in there. Why'd you get so frustrated with your sis? What happened? And then he starts to think it through. And maybe he doesn't have any words. So for example, I'm just going to tell you guys a beautiful example I saw with a dad a couple weeks ago. His son's not even 3. His son, Leon. And his son has a younger brother, Abel, who is still breastfeeding. Leon is not anymore. And Leon's a little bit jealous of his younger brother, Abel, who gets special time in mommy's arms. And so we're over, my wife and I are over for dinner. And Leon, who's my godson, I'm very proud of him, is acting like a little devil. He's just really frustrated and upset. Well, his mom is sitting over on the couch with younger brother, feeding him. At some point, Dad, Thibaut, picks up Leon in his arms, just holds him for a little while like this, and then he starts just whispering some words into his ears. He says, are you feeling frustrated right now? Yes. It was in French. Oui. Do you wish you could be in mommy's arms right now? Oui. So Leon had no idea how to put words to what he's feeling. He's 2. But he's feeling stuff. And it's affecting his behavior. Now, we could have sent Leon to bed. You know, we could have raised our voice at him. There's all kinds of, like, behavior modification reactions he could have used. That's not what he did. He was interested in what's going on inside of you right now, man. And he just started to put words to it for him. Do you know what's going to happen when mommy gets done feeding Abed? No. She's going to hold you for a little while. Do you want that? Oui. You guys get the idea. That was brilliant. See, when my kids were that age, I hadn't learned really how to have that kind of conversation yet. It was later down the road. In all honesty, looking back, we were in a lot of behavior modification. It took us a while to figure out how important the character development side was. But once we learned it, we were all in because we were convinced it was a way better approach. What's amazing is that without Leon even being punished, after he'd had some comfort, after he had a chance to express himself, Daddy put in words to his feeling, he calmed down. He didn't even go to his room. Now, it doesn't always work that well. Sometimes they do need to go to their room. But one of the things that was a key part of our disciplinary strategy is they never just went to their room. We're going to have a conversation on the front end of that. We're going to have a conversation on the back end of that. And what we're super interested in is, okay, why did this just happen? What's going on inside of you right now? And at first, they have a hard time putting words to that, but as they got older, it's amazing how good they get at describing what they were feeling. And that, guys, is an enormous life skill. That is an enormous life skill. That's one of the greatest gifts we can give to our children. Help them to put words to some of the things that they're feeling. As we get into some of these other skills down the road, for example, self-control, managing our own emotions, this is key. Because if I don't even get what's happening inside of me, I have no vocabulary, all I can do is react. Kind of a slave to my emotions. So it's not a full response. Does that help a little bit? To give a little? Yeah. So the challenge, though, with that is we as parents have to learn how to develop that skill ourselves. And that's not always easy if we're not used to doing it. I didn't grow up in a family that did that. I don't know how your guys' families are. My dad was like, go to your room. So it was hard work developing that skill, but man, I can tell you guys what a difference. And that crosses into the friendship side of things. Because that little Leon, you know how he felt about his daddy after that moment? Wow, he just wanted to hold him. He feels so close and connected to him. It's a powerful moment. Well, we can live with that with our kids at any age. Now, I'm not going to pick up our 15-year-old and cuddle him, that'll drive him nuts and her too. But there are ways to engage in that kind of interaction. Great question. You know what? I'm just going to keep moving. Was there maybe one more? Yeah, we're good. All right. Sorry, guys. We got 15 minutes here. So last thing is the parenting spectacles, and this is kind of where we're heading with the idea of friendship. The idea is really the two key words, discerning and validating. Now, there's tons we could throw in. One thing is my ability to actually see my child, to really see, and to see that my son Wesley is not like my son Micah. And he's not like my daughter Christelle. My daughter Chloe is not like my daughter Christelle. And they're not like my cousin's kids, right? They're not like my brother's children. They're their own child. And maybe in some cases I wish they were more like my brother's child. But they're not. They are who they are. And so the discerning piece is being able to see, who are you? What are you really like? And then to be able to validate and pull out the value in who my child is, so that they can start to see value also in themselves. Three key objectives to this: loving leadership, anti-fragile frustration. Sorry, that's a mouthful. I'm going to describe that in a second. Anti-fragile frustration, comfort and validation. All right, we'll dive right into this here. So let's start with the idea of loving leadership. And I want to just suggest 5, I used the language of superpower earlier, so I probably shouldn't use it, but I think these are superpowers for loving our children. As you guys know, the word love is just sort of, these days, what in the world does that mean? It can mean tons of different things. And unfortunately, a lot of what can pass for love is actually can be very, very selfish and very anchored in my own feelings and desires, right? And that's part of the reason why it's, what's your name? Margarita used the term unconditional. I think love by nature should be that, but she had to use the word because it often is very conditional, isn't it? Well, I want to put a few conditions on our love, or not so much conditions, but characteristics on our love, and suggest 5 words that actually come out of a verse in the Bible, believe it or not, Colossians 3:12, but that have been really powerful words for me and for my wife and for our children, for our whole church really, as we've been learning concretely what's it look like to love each other. What's that look like? So, there's lots that could be said. I'm going to go through quickly. Compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, patience. There's loads of other things we could add. This is not an exhaustive list. It's a starting point. Compassion. What does compassion help me to do in the life of the one I love? Well, compassion helps me to see their pain and suffering. Compassion encourages me to say, I see your pain. Or maybe I can't see your pain, but I want to see your pain. It seems like something's not right. So compassion's pushing me to see what's not quite right in you. And then it's pushing me to want to react and respond in a way that's going to be helpful to you. And it works very closely with kindness. Compassion and kindness are often closely connected because what's kindness pushes us to do, it's to, I seek your good. I can see that you're experiencing some form of pain right now. Maybe depending on the circumstances, that's a little frustrating for me, the way that you're behaving. But rather than me just being focused on myself and what I want right now, I'm going to step out and take a look at you. And I'm going to try to figure out, what do you really need right now? That's a form of kindness. I'm going to seek your good, even though that might cost me something, like some time. I may have other things I'd rather be doing right now, but I'm going to get down on your level and spend this moment with you. Humility is a huge challenge, you guys, because what's humility push us to do as parents? Humility challenges us to start with our own heart. So there's this a parable that Jesus tells in the Bible where he's talking about judgment. And he's talking about how crazy it would be for me to come over and to try to help pick a speck out of my friend's eye right here when I've got this big branch sticking out of my eye. It's like, no, start with yourself first. Then you're going to see better. And so what our friend in the back said, I'm sorry, I didn't have time to learn all you guys' names. It was quick. But what you just shared earlier was such a key point, because part of what sets me up for being able to love well is being aware of some of my own stuff, right? And so when I get into an emotional with my child, there's this voice inside of me that naturally wants to make sure my child knows that I'm right, right? And so we're in a power struggle. And the battle is, I'm right, you're wrong, and we're going to fight it out until you've understood that Daddy is right. And by the way, I'm smarter than you, and I'm stronger than you. And so that's what we find ourselves in. And all too often, our parenting comes down to these power battles, because honestly, my 12-year-old son, he thinks he's smarter than Daddy. And just between us, on certain levels, he is. It's disturbing. And what's really disturbing is he knows it more and more. He's like, Daddy, you do not know the answer to this, and I do. He loves it. But we don't want to be in that anyway. Who's smartest, who's strongest, who's right, who's wrong. Those are zero-sum games, right? There's always going to be a winner and a loser in that. Let's get out of that. Whereas if we're in a harsh situation, this isn't just with our children. This can also be with our spouses too. When I take a step back and I'm willing to say, you know what? I think I might have been wrong there. I might not have taken the time really to listen to you very well. I'll just give you a quick little anecdote. Earlier this afternoon, well, it was even late this morning, I'm getting ready to come down here. I'm going to be gone most of the weekend. And my wife, quite frankly, is a little bit frustrated because she had hopes for today. I mean, she knew I was taking off, but she thought we'd have a big part of the day. She didn't realize I was driving 3 hours to get to Manosque. And she was hoping we'd get up for a hike in the mountains. It was a beautiful day in Grenoble, way more beautiful than here, 17 degrees, just to make you jealous. And I had to drive 3 hours. So you guys, honestly, I mean, you mean a lot. You know, you're very valuable here. She was a bit frustrated though, and she, she was being careful in the way that she expressed herself, but I just tell by her body language, she wished we'd done a bit better planning out the weekend. Now, I started to get a little defensive, because I'm like, this has been on my calendar for like 2 months, so there's no surprises here, right? I mean, that's what's happening in my head. There's voices speaking in my head. But as I'm thinking about what I'm going to be talking to you guys about tonight, I'm like, be careful. Be careful, Nick. And so I stopped and I listened to her, and I tried to put myself in her shoes. Like, you know what? I get it, because the fact is, I was not thinking much about her or my son as I prepared for this weekend. I had a ton of other things going on, and I didn't prepare the family very well for me to be gone. So with all this defensiveness in me, as I started to talk myself through that, it calmed down. And as she got done with her thing, she's sort of getting geared up for battle. And I just said, man, you know what? I think you're right. Like, I did not anticipate well, and I'm sorry. That changed everything. It's crazy. The power. A little humility. And it didn't even cost that much. That wasn't even that hard. Just the simple fact of saying, you know what? You're onto something. I should have thought more about this. Her attitude changed completely, guys. And that happens with our kids too. When we're willing to come towards them and be like, you know what? Daddy's not been very available for you recently. He's been so busy. You've been here all evening, and I've been on calls and on the computer, and you've been wanting me to get on and take a look at your Minecraft stadium that you're building. I get that you're frustrated, man. Now, I don't appreciate the tone of voice that you use, but let's start with me. right? And it changes the game. And it's a way of me loving him. So gentleness is me remembering how fragile we are and how easily a word spoken in haste, a word spoken with selfish intent, pride, can wound my child. How quickly. And guys, we parents, we have such power to wound our children. And I'm going to be even more specific. I say this as a dad. Dads, we've got incredible power to wound our children. Our words are so valuable to them. And again, moms, you too. But you know what I mean. There's something about a dad's words. Oh, the words that we speak to our children can stick in their brains for the rest of their lives. And some of them will. So that should sober us up. Oh my gosh. My kid's going to remember some of the things that I say, some of the moments that he has lived with me, and they're not all going to be good ones. So remembering how fragile the human brain is. It's like butter in there. It's so easily imprinted. You know, we leave a mark. Well, it pushes us towards gentleness, right? And then patience. I'm going to take time before I respond. I'm going to give you time, knowing that change takes time. Rather than feeling like you got to fix this right now. Patience slows us all down and says, oh, okay, you know what? Whew, there's a lot of emotions here right now. Why don't you take a little break? I'm going to take a little break. I'm going to breathe. Helps to have a little glass of red wine around for those that appreciate that kind of thing. Calm it down. And then not for my son, who's 12, but for me. He likes Orangina, so have your cup of Orangina. And then let's come back to the table and let's chat. All right, so there's a loving side to this, but then there's also a leadership side to this. And the leadership side has a number of steps that we're not going to be able to cover super in depth, but I'm just going to go through them quickly. It is up to us as parents to establish the game plan. There is a well-intended parental philosophy out there that started out really good and just went really bad. It got way off track for reasons that we're not going to get into tonight, but it's in English we talk about positive parenting. En français, éducation positive. Who can be against positive parenting, right? We all want to be positive parents. And it was initially a reaction against authoritarian parenting, where it's like, just because I said it. You know, we're not going to have any kind of conversation. The whole loving thing was aside. And it was just leadership, dictatorship even in the home. Well, the positive parenting people said, we need some love. And they were right. We needed that. But what did they do? They went all love, and they kicked out the leadership. Right? So you parents, you never say no to your children. You can't tell your children what to do. That's you imposing on them. You're not the one to set up the rules. This is a democracy. Right? And again, I'm all in favor of democracy when it comes to governments, but not to your home. You shouldn't have your kids voting on whether or not they eat their peas. Eat your peas. You want to bet? So it's up to us to set the tone and set the rules and the expectations, what we might call the game plan. And I want to give you a couple questions, a couple ideas to just fuel that, because that's a huge conversation in and of itself. So, for example, one idea is defining the word obedience. Now, you guys might not all be comfortable with that. Joe Frost, Super Nanny, she uses it. So that means it's okay. If you don't like obedience, find another word. But you guys get what I mean. We had a definition of obedience in our home that all of our kids memorized. What is obedience, Wesley? It's doing what you're told to do, when you're told to do it, with the right heart attitude. That was it. So then as we talk through what we might call misbehavior or disobedience, we could ask the question, what was the definition of obedience again? Which one of those did you not include in your response to mommy? Yeah, my heart attitude was pretty lame. Okay, let's talk about that, right? So now that was our definition. You guys can come up with your own, but it helps that our kids and us are on the same page. They know what we're expecting. The other thing that's helpful with that is we are distinguishing between disobedience and what we call in French, the bêtises. You guys know the term bêtise? Bêtise is just the dumb things kids do. We're we're having a fun time at the table, and my kid's getting a little excited, and he knocks his cup over, and it spills Kool-Aid onto the floor. And we got to clean that up, and maybe it's going to leave a stain. Well, are we going to punish him for that? No. I was just being a kid. You're 3. Now, if he's doing that every night, that's a different story. And we're starting to cross over into something more than just an accident, but a willful decision. Oh, that was pretty fun to knock my cup off the table. All of a sudden, it's like, okay, no, we're going to set a rule. You are not allowed to knock your cup of Kool-Aid off the table. And if you do, this will be the consequence. So being clear on the distinguishing between what's obedience, what's disobedience, what's just kid stuff, and then helping our kids to know, all right, what's going to happen? What if I don't obey the rules? What are you going to do? That's the big question, isn't it? Well, depending on your culture, you'll answer that question in different ways. I'm going to give a culturally appropriate response to this question, because in France, just in case you didn't know, spanking is illegal since 2019. Between us, my wife and I both grew up in homes that used a little spanking spoon. We did that with our children. Fortunately, we finished that stage before 2019. I feel sorry for all of you guys. But Joe Frost presents a strategy that involves a timeout. And what's interesting about timeouts is you can do timeouts, cute little girls. Everybody's attention just goes over to Hello Kitty. I mean, who couldn't love Hello Kitty? Man. So great. So timeouts can be well done or they can be poorly done. They can be well used or they can be poorly used. When you, in a fit of frustration and anger, just send your child to their room for however long, the rest of their lives, that's not good parenting, right? So I just want to suggest a couple steps that we can use when we're using something like a timeout, what Joe Frost calls the naughty spot technique. Maybe you don't like the term naughty, but basically when your child disobeys, what happens? Now she suggests if you have steps in your house, that there's a step that they sit on, low down, or there's a corner that they go to. And some of that's so that their room isn't a place where they associate discipline with. They want to create a different space that's not their room. The room is a place where they go to maybe play or to rest or to read with mommy and daddy. But they create a space in the home that this is the spot, right? And so we set that up and we talk it through. We explain it. When a child is misbehaving, is disobeying, we give a warning. You are breaking one of our family rules, or you know you should not be doing that. If you keep doing that, you're going to need to be disciplined. Or again, use whatever language you like. But we're explaining, we're warning, we're setting them up. We're not just reacting, right? And then, if they persist in that, we're going to get down on their level and talk it through. Mommy asked you please to not write on the walls with your markers. You're doing that again. And now you're going to have to go spend some time in the, whatever you want to call that, little spot, the naughty spot. So what Joe Frost suggests is it's a minute per age of life. So in other words, if your child is only 3 minutes. If they're 18, you don't do that. But the idea is that it's a reasonably short length of time. That a child can handle for their age. What's interestingly enough, though, is she'll start that as early as 1 year. Interesting. So there's a little explanation. We take them over. We set the timer. And of course, every one of our children is just gonna stay there. So obediently, 3 minutes, okay. See you in a little bit, Mom. No, that's not usually how it goes, right? They don't stay. And some of our kids are more strong-willed than others. And so what do? Well, if they don't stay, you come and you take them back again. And you explain it all again. And you restart the timer. And then you do it again. And then you got to do it again and again and again. And I watched her with 2 little girls who they were trying to get them to go to bed. And they did it again and again and again, the same bedtime routine for 2 hours the first night. And then an hour and a half etc., etc. And it took them a good 5 nights before the routine was established, and then they were done. And the girls got it. Mom and Dad are not bending. We're not going to win this battle. We might as well just go to sleep. And it was amazing to watch her imposing this. And again, what she said the rule typically is, what she finds is 3 experiences where mom and dad really stand their ground on the timeout, and they keep bringing you back until you get all the way through your timer. 3 disciplinary experiences like that, and the kids usually got it. Now I see some skeptical faces out there. I was skeptical too. Again, that wasn't our strategy. So I'm sharing something with you that I'm getting from somebody else. You're going to have to test it out. But I find it interesting, and I know that the repetition in the standing ground is a key for the kid to understand you're not bending on this, and this is what's going to happen. It's going to be the consequence. Now, what's also interesting is how appropriate a form of exclusion is for a child that is disobeying. Because in life, when human beings misbehave, when they are unkind to others around them, when they're disrespectful, when they don't obey the rules, often that results in some form of social exclusion. And they're going to find that at school. Little kids who grow up thinking that they're little kings and queens and that everyone else revolves around them, they find themselves without any friends, don't they? So we're having them live a little limited form of controlled exclusion, so they get a little taste of that. This is what it's like. Now we're going to come back around at the end of the timer and ask them for an apology. And if they don't apologize, we're relaunching the timer. They're not ready. Now, when they're ready to apologize, they're going to apologize. We're going to talk it back through again with them, and then we're going to give hugs and kisses, and it's all over, and on we go. For our day, right? So that's one possible approach to setting in place form of parental leadership where there are consequences that don't involve any kind of physical pain for your child, right? You'll have to decide if you think that's something that you can do or not. It's 9:03. That time went really quick, guys. So sorry. And I'm going to maybe wrap it up on this idea. Do I have up there? This operating principle of connecting before you correct. And it gets back into what was just asked about developing emotional intelligence. One of the worst things that I can do as a parent is try to discipline my child under the influence of my emotions. When I'm emotional, I can't teach my kid anything. I just can't. All I'm going to teach them is how to react emotionally. And pretty soon what I'm going to find my kid doing and saying is just a reflection of what I do and say, and it's not going to be pretty. So I need to be the adult in the room who is not mastered by his emotions. And often I need some time for that. Because as you guys know, once those emotions kick in, sometimes what happens, especially if it's intense, is what is called flooding. And our brains can be flooded with emotions. And then I don't have access to what we sometimes refer to as the prefrontal cortex, that part of my brain that helps me to take a step back and breathe and think and empathize and try to put myself in your shoes. And no, when I'm under the influence of my emotions, I'm often in fight, flight, or freeze mode, right? I'm in survival mode. And the things that happen when I'm in survival mode are just not that good. So one of the nice things about the connect before you correct approach is to say, if I as a parent am not yet ready to connect with my child, I need some time out myself. So if there's another parent around, sometimes the advantage of having another parent around is we can tag team. Okay, Annie, sweetie, I'm a little bit worked up. I just need you to step in and take a moment with him right now. I'm going to go and just breathe. Calm down, and then I'll come back around. If there's no other parent there, you're going to have to come up with a strategy for what do you want to have happen during that time while you're calming yourself down and getting yourself set up to initially connect with your child before you move into correction mode. Because what you're going to find is actually that extra time you take to calm yourself down saves you a ton of time on the back end. Because when you correct first, what happens? Oftentimes you go into an emotional spiral with your child. You're emotional, your child is emotional, and on and on and on it goes. And that takes forever. And then you both leave, and it's affecting the rest of your day, right? It just sticks with you. Whereas when you give yourself just those extra few moments to calm it down, get your mind straight, remember the dream, remember the dream, friendship with my child, trust, love, all that. Yes. Okay. and then I'm back in, and I want to hear you first. I want to connect before we start to get into, okay, but do you agree with me the way you just responded to your mom? That's not okay. All right, let's talk about that. What's amazing, you guys, is, again, there's a superpower to this, because when your kid feels heard, this is especially true of teenagers. When they feel heard by you and seen by you, man, they're a lot more open to talking through what was wrong in their behavior. When you come in with all guns firing, man, they're well armed for the fight. Woo, better than ever. I'm gonna have to stop there. So, guys, you have access to the PowerPoint here. I wanted to get into a few other objectives, but we just don't have the time. I'll just summarize them real quick so you know kind of where I was going, and I'm going to give you some resources for those that might want to follow up. Anti-fragile frustration, what would we have talked about there? So one of the consequences of positive parenting is communicating to parents the idea that your children are exceptionally fragile, and they're prone to trauma, to being traumatized. So if you don't get this right, you're going to traumatize your child, and they're going to be messed up for the rest of their life. And so what that has resulted in is what we sometimes refer to as helicopter parenting, right? Where we're just sort of, we just don't want to do anything wrong. You know what I mean? Like, and I don't want to hurt my child, and so I'm afraid to be authoritative and say no. And the fact is, kids are tough, man. Kids are tough. Now, can we wound them easily with our words? Yes, we can. But they're super resilient. They come back. Now, is that an excuse for harsh, angry words? No, it's not. But kids can handle a lot. And one of the things they need to learn to handle in life, my friends, is frustration. Or else they're going to have a hard life. We have a whole generation, oh my gosh, a whole generation of kids growing up without getting used to being frustrated because their parents are doing everything they want them. Everything they want. The parents are adapting themselves to the kids to try to limit as much as possible the child's frustration. And so when the child comes up against frustration, they don't know what to do. There's a ton of people that have driver's licenses that are behind the wheel that seem like those types of children. The slightest frustration on the road, and it's like it's the end of the world. Well, are you kidding me? So what we're realizing, we have a generation of people that haven't learned to manage the experience of frustration when I can't get what I want right now. One of our roles as parents is to help our kids learn that. Sorry. You know, a lot of situations where you can't get what you want right now. And so we're learning to develop anti-fragile children. We're taking an anti-fragile approach where, you know what, it's okay if you suffer a little bit. You know what, I'm going to let you take that step out that way, even though I know you might go face first. Your head's going to be okay. It's amazing how spongy they are up to a certain age, right? And so we're even sometimes setting our children up for situations that are going to challenge them, stretch them, be hard for them, maybe frustrating, rather than trying to insulate them from all suffering. No, they need to learn how to survive in a really harsh world, guys, right? So the idea of anti-fragile frustration is that's part of what we build into our parenting structure. And then the notion of validation is what we talked about before. We want to be able to say to our kids, I hear you, I see you, and you are so valuable. And you know what? I might not agree with everything that you just said, but I'm going to try to find the one piece of what you said that I do agree with. And I'm going to lean into that so that you can feel like, yeah, Dad knows where I'm coming from. Mom knows where I'm coming from. All right? All right, guys. So just show you real quick some of the resources at the very end here. Oh, man, we would have had so much fun with grit. That is a great category. Anyway, here we go. So this is what we've seen tonight. I started out with seeing our children, loving and growing. Parents who see well, love well. When parents love well, children grow well. I deeply believe that, though I know there can be exceptions. We talked about distinguishing intentional parenting from autopilot parenting. And then we looked very rapidly at these three different aspects of parental vision. The spyglass, looking into the future. The rearview mirror, being aware of the influence of my past. And then spectacles, eyes to see my children right now. To be able to connect with them and even comfort and validate them before I correct them. Okay? So we're in a church context. I'm not going to preach it to you guys. I am a pastor. I do want to say that I will close with this. The faith factor was a really big deal in our family experience. And maybe a lot of you are people of faith with different religious backgrounds. I don't know what your experience is. This was a significant part of our family life, and it was so helpful on many levels. And I won't get into all the details. If it would be interesting for any of you to come and talk to me afterwards about some of the practical role of being people of faith, how that affected our parenting and our relationship with our children. I'd be glad to talk to you about that. If I had more time, I would have loved to tell you about the place of grace, forgiveness, and trust, and how those things get cultivated within a faith context. But we don't have time. So I'm going to wrap it up with, oh, my picture didn't show up there. I wonder why not. Oh, I just lost that. I had book titles up there, but I'll just let you know, for those of you that would be interested in looking into some of these categories in more depth, there are some wonderful, wonderful books that are, in many cases, quick reads. A book that's just called Grit by Angela Duckworth. This became a major theme in my family while my kids were high schoolers. Cultivating grit. In fact, they made fun of Daddy a lot about it because I talk about it all the time. Even today, that word comes up a lot in jokes. But the book is excellent for thinking about how you develop passion and perseverance for sticking with long-term goals. What an amazing life skill that is for our children. Second book is called I Hear You. That is a short read or audiobook. You can listen to that whole book in 3 hours. It's a short little listen or a quick read. That is all about validation. That book was a game changer for me as a dad, teaching me a skill I did not know until my kids were in high school, how to validate my children and how to help my children feel heard. So that was very helpful. No Drama Discipline is a book by Daniel Siegel, who I mentioned before. This really provides a helpful disciplinary strategy, especially for kids in your early years as you're getting started. It really helps establish a framework for discipline for those that don't know how to do it. And his approach is non-violent, it's not corporal. So I think it can relate to a lot of different cultural settings. The book Parenting from the Inside Out, I already mentioned. And then, of course, a Joe Frost book called Toddler Rules, again, which is more for early childhood. Guys, thanks for your patience. I'm about 15 minutes over. I'm going to stop there. If people want to stick around with questions and so on, feel free. I do know that there are drinks back there. There was, at one point, hot water that's no longer hot. May get reheated for tisane. I'll be around for a little while if you have specific personal questions, about your family that you want to ask. But if people need to go, feel free. I will open it up for those that can stay. If there are any questions that you want to ask, I'm just going to hang out for a little while. Yeah.